Welcome to the OCTOPOD. I'm Kyle Davies, head of the Office of the CTO. Join us as we dive into the latest technologies and trends shaping business. Whether you're a tech enthusiast, a business leader, or just looking to stay ahead in the digital age, this podcast is for you. Let's unlock opportunities with technology together. Let's jump in. Welcome everybody to 2026. Today we're going to be diving into some of the trends that we believe are going to impact our industries as we progress through the year. So I want to give a bit of a view of the macroeconomic climate. I'm not going to be diving into all the details, but kind of to summarize the impact that the inflationary rises that we're seeing, the geopolitical landscape, the labor market, and the energy costs that are spiraling out of control, sometimes because of AI, sometimes not. If we then think about how the tariffs and things that are getting put in place at this moment in time are taking an impact on various organizations and countries, and you put all this into a big mixing pot and you stir it, it causes a lot of challenge and confusion for people. So I want to just give a bit of a view on that and how it's going to impact the IT market. So I think if we think about that higher cost of capital for a second, what we're going to see here is people looking at that return of investment. So people listening to this podcast will be thinking, well, we always look at return of investment, Kyle. Yes, you do. But the value chain, as we've discussed many times on one of these podcasts, is sometimes not realized or ever actually looked at once something's been implemented. So you never know whether you even got the return of investment. And if we think about that higher cost of capital, that higher cost of the resource and the things that you're buying, you're going to be even putting more scrutiny on that investment. And the same again, where people are making the decisions around OPEX over CAPEX versus just moving to a consumption-based and as-a-service model, which then means you can kind of get a load of these things shifted to the right into an organization, or even in Jaro's way, shift to the left into an organization instead. Now, realistically, what that gives you is cost transparency and predictability. So in an era where there is going to become a little bit of uncertainty, especially around supply chain, having it as a service means that you can outsource that risk to a as a service provider. Okay. Productivity pressures. This is fueled by AI. So everyone's looking at, as I always say, the increasing of income, decreasing cost, and providing exceptional experiences. What we're really seeing here is how does AI bring this to life or not, as the case may be. And there's a lot of AI fatigue out there where organizations aren't seeing that return of investment, but they're still trying to understand the productivity impact it will have on a per employee basis. So then they can work out what their true cost is to serve whoever their customers are at that point as well. I think the other thing is just really just to touch on for a second here is just on that geopolitical instability and how you get resilience over your supply chain. So whether that is looking at resilience from where you procure your equipment from, whether you do vendor diversification, where you may have been a Dell only house previously and now you're going to use Dell, Lenovo, HP and someone else or whatever it might be, to be able to get access to the equipment and the parts and the computational power you need to do your job, so that's in the data center or at the edge. There's also the use cases around public cloud and sovereign clouds. And for anyone that's been reading any of the news articles early into 26, you would have realized that the Azure UK data centers, especially the one in the south, was actually full the other week, completely full, that if you turned a workload off, you wouldn't be able to turn it back on again. So this unlimited cloud that we like to think of as a fallback when we can't get the things that we might want to put on-prem, sometimes might not be feasible for you as well. So again, you need to look at these supply chains, how you then actually consolidate into a multi-hybrid cloud environment that Rolf's been talking about for many years as well. But then also, how do you then look at using it for VDI or AVD workloads to offset the end user environment? So again, it starts to compound the issues even further. And that'll lead to this kind of geopolitical instability, will lead to this kind of increased scrutiny of the supply chain, the MSPs and the third parties as well, because everyone will say they can do something, but it doesn't necessarily mean they will be able to, depending on who their downstream suppliers are as well. So a lot of uncertainty, but the good thing is there's a lot of options out there, which is the value of being in an organization like CDW for us, is ultimately how do we actually make this simple for people as well. So there's always a way forward. It just means thinking outside of the box. So like I said, we're going to talk about the cybersecurity trends for 26 from my perspective. I'm going to cover the Chief Technology for Security role. Rob's then going to give you a bit of a view on the hybrid platforms, Tim on Workspace, and Jaro on digital enablement. So first off, Rob, we're going to come to you on hybrid platforms and what you believe people should be thinking about heading into 2026.
Yeah, thanks, Kyle. And interesting to see how all the macro stuff is playing out, and especially the supply chain constraints that we're seeing around memory and storage, and the impacts they're already having on lead times, on costs, and the knock-on effects that's going to have on projects for customers. Ultimately, formulating in a level of risk to the business. Can they serve their customers? Can they deliver new innovation? Can they meet regulatory requirements for replacement of kit, etc.? It's going to be an interesting year, I think, with all things considered in that front. But putting that to one side and assuming that we can get hold of the kit we want at a price that is acceptable. And I did speak to one of our partners the other day who had an interesting perspective that there might be some over ordering in the supply chain from some of the large suppliers, which may turn out to release some capacity into the market later this year, which could relieve some of this challenge earlier than expected. Doesn't give us any concrete information to go off, which means we have to plan for the worst, but it at least gives us some light at the end of the tunnel potential on that front as well. But yeah, so from a platform's perspective specifically, we can talk about all sorts of trends and ideas and thoughts, etc. The problem I think we have though is that so many organizations are at such a different level of maturity that what is next top of mind for one organization might be the past for somebody else and might be a distant horizon for the next one. So I had a think about how we could set probably sort of three foundational imperatives that I think is important for people to think about this year and how we can put them across a lens to try and help us sort of validate the need for each project we're thinking of. So the three foundations that I was thinking about was building a platform for modernization. And what I mean by that is how do we architect an infrastructure and cloud platform that can meet all of the business needs that the organization has? Gartner has a stat that over 50% of enterprises will not get the results from their multi-cloud deployments by 2029, mainly because they're by accident rather than by design. So I think there's an area of deliberacy needed in that platform design element that is hybrid or multi-cloud by nature. So that's number one. Number two, you touched on it, Cal, from a security perspective, but this concept that digital resilience is now foundational business resilience. Every organization is a digital business today, whether you think it or not. Whether you're regulated by something like DORA or not, I think every business should be looking at legislation like that and implementing against it to ensure their success and future. And if 25 taught us anything is that the bigger you are, the harder you fall at times, from 150 odd year old supply companies that went bust earlier in the year into all the big news stories later on in the year. So I think there's a massive piece around that digital resilience. And finally, the network as that strategic platform for your business. Everything else we're going to talk about, whether it's how Tin connects users, or how you deliver great experiences, security, AI, data, without the network, it's all useless. And the stats at the moment is something like 32% of CIOs seeing up to 5 million a year in network outage costs. I mean, that's a low number, I think, in my opinion, but it's still a significant impact on productivity and service quality, regardless of where you are in your maturity curve. So there's, I think, three things that I want people to focus on: build modern platform, think about that end-to-end digital resilience, and how they're going to modernize their network as that strategic platform.
Yeah, I think the networking was quite interesting because how many of those are not actually to do with the network going down, and how many of it is something else that has been blamed?
Always the network's fault, yeah.
Always the network's fault from the days of being a sysadmin, but I think there's always the challenge with the data on these things. But I do believe that if you haven't got a high performing dynamic network as you move into 2026 and into 27, and you think about the innovation that you need to go through as an organization to remain relevant on how you serve whoever you need to serve, then you're going to miss a trick significantly.
It's going to take a different mindset than we've had now. I'll talk about it in a second. What I want everyone to do, though, is think about them things and every project they're doing against some sort of strategic priorities, which is how do we drive operational simplicity across everything we do? Because people are expensive at the end of the day and complex environments are more likely to go wrong. how do we bake that security into everything we do so it becomes part of the architecture rather than bolted on? And that's across every area. That's not just a hybrid platforms thing. That's an everything thing. And then how do we balance that against an economic discipline program that ensures that we're paying the right cost for them services and delivering the right value? And I think regardless of what the trend is, whatever it is you're trying to do, whether it's to eliminate strategic debt or deliver observability or manage AI within your organization, if it's delivering one of them foundational components against one of them prioritized lenses, then we can try and deliver much more valuable projects and try and cut out the noise at the end of the day. That's kind of my thought point for this year, rather than it being, oh, you must go do this and you must go do that and you must go do the other, because that becomes very specific to where you are in your organization on its maturity curve at the end of the day.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, but I don't know, Tim, how does that sort of play in from your side? Because obviously it's great to have a platform that no one ever sees and looks at and is quite boring, as we would joke about between the two of us all day long. Still need to get access to this stuff and actually be able to consume it to do our job, whatever that job is. Customer services, is it R&D, is it frontline work, or whatever it is? What are you seeing from your side?
There's a number of things you said there, and I want to avoid going me too, but there's a lot of interesting stuff to pull out. That I think where it comes down to is exactly what you were saying, and I'm going to pull out the keywords: value, noise reduction. It's not about do this, do that. It's the why. It's the result. It's the outcome. And I would love, and there was a Dilbert cartoon I saw ages ago, and it said, when everything's working, everyone's like, well, why do IT exist? And when something goes wrong, it's like, what are you even here for? You're always stuck in that quandary. But here's the thing. I would love the entire modern workspace to be invisible. Whatever device, wherever I am, whatever I want to do, I have no problem. Security isn't seen as a trip up point. It's an enabler. It's like brakes on a race car. It helps me go quicker. All of this needs to start tying together. And when I look at what you were opening up with there, Carl, about the macro supply constraints, Rob, you were saying about the risk to the business. That over-ordering one was a really interesting one. Planning for the worst. Unfortunately, I think we found, particularly in the modern workspace, for a long time, people have always planned for the worst. And so they've used one-size-fit-all blanket approaches. And when I look at 2026 and also going onwards, to 2030 and onwards, there's a couple of focus areas where I think businesses can realize the maximum value, not just in doing something, but applying thought process. And the ones I've got is from technology to human outcome. Historically, it's very much about buying tech. And we mentioned about cost savings. Well, why replace tech if it's still fit for purpose? Well, how do you know if it's fit for purpose? Rob, coming back to what you were saying there about experience. It's about measuring, managing, and monitoring and understanding what a human experience is like. Not just a tick box on a bit of tech, but understanding what the true human experience is like. We go from ownerships to outcome. Really simply, savings is what someone is chasing, but saving money doesn't necessarily increase the business value or return on investment or human productivity. There's a Gartner statistic: 77% of CIOs state that the pressure to reduce IT costs has increased over the past year. Completely agree, 100%. Yet only 29% believe that such cuts lead to improved long-term business outcomes. And it's that point where I really want to nail in. Everything I think we should be doing over the next couple of years is about cost-conscious decisions, but it's not necessarily about cost savings. A prime example is endpoint experience, as I just said, end user management, end user measurement. Understanding when an experience is subpar, understand when you're not giving people the opportunity to do their best job. And that's how you make decisions around technology. We also then have to build up on the foundations. We can't have this sort of exceptional end user experience managing, monitoring, without having the foundations in place. Security, Carl, I'm not going to cover this one because I know you are going to go later on, but understanding that security is a foundation to everything and anything we do. Connectivity, as you say, Rob, is also a foundational pillar. Without those two things, everything on top of that, you can make whatever decision you want, but you have to understand that this is all intrinsically linked. It's about the weakest link in the chain. We look at an experience-led outcome that relies on all of these foundation components to give us a reliable experience for end users, to make IT invisible, to make it no more than turn on, do my job. We also look at how we measure this experience, we look at how we measure productivity. And we've had the AI conversation. It wouldn't be 2025, 2026 without talking about AI, but we have to focus on the why of AI. And we're looking at these problems we're facing, Carl, as you were saying about the memory shortage, about the issues we're seeing in the supply chain. A lot of this is driven around cloud-based consumption of AI capabilities. But what we're seeing is we have an end-user AI capability that's not being leveraged. That point, Rob, you were saying about the network's the problem. And what if my laptop can tell me using local end-user AI that the network isn't the problem? It's an application. It might be my local Wi-Fi, which admittedly is a network, but it might be a home Wi-Fi. This is about understanding how about the right technology in the right place, utilizing the right tools can actually fix problems and reduce noise, deliver instant value by doing things such as reducing the number of calls to the service desk. And I'm sure Jaro is going to come on to this zero ticket architecture concept, is if we can help fix users at the endpoint with the right investment in the right technology, we start delivering value straight out of the gate. It's not about building capability because a lot of that is available. We look at the buy off the shelf capabilities and leveraging that around end user enablement. So I know I've wandered on a little bit. We've got 6 core areas. I'm not going to cover them because we're going to cover those in other podcasts. But if we look at going from technology to human outcomes, what is the impact we do to an end user? How do we go from ownerships to outcomes? And we talk about XLA sometimes in this, but it's not just about the color of the box. It's what the box delivers from a personal impact. And then we look into the next 5 years is how everything we do today has to protect an investment, deliver a value that we can leverage over the next 5 years. The most advanced modern workspace still requires on those pillars, as I said earlier on, security, connectivity, because without them, we have nothing. So with that in mind, Carl, I'm going to pass over to you if that's all right, is without going too much into the security from the modern workspace, it is one of the most critical foundation points for everything we're going to be talking about today. Do you want to take on your perspective?
Yeah, I can give a view from a cybersecurity perspective, but I just want to pick on something first that you mentioned there. And I think there's a phrase that we can use around productivity matters more than innovation theatres. So there's a lot of cool whiz-bang technology out there that can do something for an organization. And I think with the climate that we're moving into, driving that productivity, reducing the risk, making sure you're operationally resilient will be more valuable to your business than maybe some of the cooler stuff we might want to do, right, as an example. But from a cybersecurity perspective, I'm seeing 6 things just to make it really clear, and I'll dive into a couple of them. AI-driven threats and defense techniques. Identity is the new frontier, right? That is the number one in and out capability in your organization, right? Whether that's machine or user-based. Resilience in cloud, which is one for really what Rob's been covering from his cyber resilience and business resilience talk track. There is the supply chain, which we've been talking about, as well as the up and coming capability around quantum. It's a bit more out there, more 2020, 2028, 2029, I would say, rather than right now, but you need to be thinking about it at least. The regulatory landscape, and then AI fatigue and skills gap, right, which is driving a challenge as well. And I was going to pick on a couple of those. So we think about the AI-driven threat and defense for a second. What does this actually mean? Well, everyone will have seen phishing, smishing, vishing, all these new shings that are being sent out, right? But basically what they are now is AI enhanced, which now makes it even harder for a human to realize that it's actually not real. Okay, so the days of the things that were sent to your email that you could easily tell because there were spelling mistakes or the logos were incorrect or whatever it might be, they're a lot harder to spot now than they were before. Coupling that with deepfakes as well, so being able to completely deepfake an individual within candidly less than 5 minutes, which is something I've done recently, opens up a new level of threat. Whether that is using that deepfake as an agent powered by AI to extort and to basically spread disinformation or whatever it might be, becomes a challenge to manage as well. And there are technologies out there that can spot some of these things. They're not perfect yet, but they're getting better. There's the whole kind of synthetic identity piece that comes with those deepfakes as well. So if you think about AI-generated identities for a second, and that provides a synthetic access, which is ultimately moving faster and trying different things that a human would try, but at a more rapid pace. Right, the machine is always faster than the human in these measures, and that's where that kind of threat actor world is a lot more than most organizations that we have in an enterprise world. Okay. So they are trialing new things, testing new things, driving efficiencies in their supply chains as organizations within a criminal aspect that can get into your organization and cause damage in some way, shape, or form. And the deepfakes we saw back end of last year extorting money out of organizations in China to the tune of $50 million and things, they're just examples of what can happen when you can fully clone an individual and make someone believe that that's them. So you couple that with an autonomous attack where AI is manipulating the access through the environment, traversing the network, doing the various prompts that are required on switches through to whatever sessions they're running across their environments, means that they can scale and get through your environment quicker than any human ever could. So it becomes a challenge. And the only real way to defend against that AI-driven threat and defense is by using AI. So which is kind of weird when you say it out loud, use AI to fight AI. It sounds very Terminator-like with Skynet, realistically, but that is the kind of way that we're moving from a security perspective, is making sure that we're using the automation and capability of AI to track and monitor the anomalies, but also act upon them for you. Because if you don't, by the time a human has made a decision, it may be too late. So that's one big area that we're going to unpack in a few episodes' time, but that's just one that's really front of mind right now. I touched on identity as the new frontier. Okay, identity-led attacks. So we said, I think last year, if you listened to our cyber resilience podcast, was around how if you wanted to take down an organization, what was the one thing you'd go after? The identity provider, right? Because if you took down the identity provider, guess what? No one can log in, no one can scan barcodes, no one can send emails and all this kind of stuff. So if you did manage to compromise the identity platform in some way, shape or form, someone would be in a very bad situation. And then if you couple that identity as the new frontier with zero trust, that ultimately will then give you a framework to then provide the least privileged access really should be following. So they're kind of like two examples. Cloud and security, I kind of mentioned with Rob. I've already touched on geopolitical regulatory landscapes, which we'll go into in more detail in a separate session. But on the final piece for me is around this AI fatigue and skills gap. Everyone will remember all of these challenges from a people hiring perspective. We would have seen in various news outlets around the really bad UK government, don't become a ballet dancer, become a cybersecurity analyst, I think it was, that was out in back end of 24. And we look at the cyber skills shortage in the market on its own is a challenge that we have. If you couple that with people that understand cybersecurity and AI, that catchment of people decreases even further, which means that when we're trying to find the talent to drive things forward, it's going to be really hard for organizations where this kind of buying it in as a service is going to become really, really powerful to ensure that you can respond in the right way. Because you might not be able to, one, find the resources, afford them, because if they are in such high demand, then you are going to pay more money for them. That's unfortunately the way the world works. And then also on the side of that, from an AI fatigue perspective, everyone's fed up of hearing about AI. I'm fed up of hearing about it, and it's part of my job, right? But realistically, it's not going to go away. But if I'm an individual contributor in an organization, AI for me is how do I use Copilot? How do I do this? How do I do that? What they don't understand in a lot of these cases and what they're not being enabled on is the risk that poses when you put the wrong information in the wrong place, right? So if you share all of your IP to a public source in OpenAI, as an example, or how do you know whether the information that's being provided is accurate? Okay, so that also provides disinformation. That also provides challenges within the way you serve your customer's customer. So they're the kind of high-level things for cybersecurity. Yes, I can go into lots of other things, but realistically, they're the ones that I believe will be front of mind for most people as we go into 26. On that though, Jaro, I think the bringing to get this all together, right, is the key thing. Right? And if we think about Rob's world of platforms, trying to make them invisible, Tim trying to make his end users as productive as they can be, security trying to protect all the assets an organization has and not get duped by a criminal organization of some sort from a cybersecurity perspective. What's the world of digital enablement look like for 26?
What I'm really seeing is, I guess, 6 key things that will need to happen for any organizations to to successfully be able to demonstrate the value they get out of their investment, whether it is in AI or anything else. One of them is what you guys mentioned already, which is the current geopolitical situation, where those costs are not just increasing the memory costs and various other hardware costs in the supply chain, because what that will do in turn is actually increase the cost of the software, because of the software vendors will have suddenly higher costs. Therefore, that will go up. So the customers eventually, and this might take a little bit of time, but eventually they will experience more increases in their software and hardware costs as we go throughout this year and next year. This is what I would expect. And therefore, as a technology leader that's trying to look ahead, what's really important is understanding that that's coming and being ready for it. And really, this is where we talk a lot about doing more with the same. Doesn't necessarily mean that every organization will have the luxury of either having extra budgets or being on the other end of the spectrum where they just won't have as much money as the year before to spend. With most of the organizations that I'm talking to at the moment, they are looking to utilize concepts such as hyper-automation and others to squeeze as much out of their existing spend as possible and deliver as much of that value as possible. And that's across software, hardware, services, and so forth. In order for that to happen, to do more with the same, as my point one, you need to have a pretty strong vision. And this is where Tim already alluded to my favorite topic, zero ticket. Obviously, looking at it from the perspective of the end user, because just like in modern workspace, the absolute focus has to be on the end user of that service, whether that's an employee, whether that's an external customer. It's absolutely crucial that we measure that and we understand how we're improving the service delivery, how we're optimizing it. And for that, you need to have an overall vision, overall strategy to get there, so that any change you're making to your systems, any investment you're making, any hires you're doing, it's important that that contributes toward that wider vision. You're not steering away from what you're supposed to be doing. Another big part, and this is, I guess, quite specific to DE, is being able to access AI budgets. Now, we know that DE traditionally has been, especially IT service management, has traditionally been a pretty under-invested area. And this AI craze, AI hype is also enabling these teams, if you turn it on its head, an opportunity to tap into those AI budgets and deliver value, which I think is super exciting. And that's something that the technology leaders should focus on. One big thing that transpired last year was having integration as part of your strategy. For way too long, we've been focusing on individual technologies and trying to get more out of them, trying to replace them for whatever reasons, and trying to ultimately get people upskilled on those. The integrations we have done so far have typically been something that was kind of almost forced on us. We understood that has to be there or things won't work. Now what we're looking at is integration platforms that have security and governance kind of first approach and enable you to get the right data to the right people at the right time. And only then what happens is your data can flow through the organization into the right places, into the right departments, with the right level of security, with the right level of governance. And not only that, this creates the base for you to then leverage virtual agents, agentic AI, because you have already set up that structure. And the overarching point for any and all of this needs to be the technology leaders looking at optimizing that service experience. And for that, as Tim mentioned already, what's absolutely key is to have the right data, be able to trust them, at least to an extent, being able to analyze them as automatically as possible, and utilize those results to drive further changes, to understand the prioritization, understand what is your end user sentiment, understand what is the performance of all the different technologies, whether it's the network Rob mentioned that's usually blamed, whether it's the end user compute, whether that's pieces of software, whether that's individual applications we're trying to support. It's really key that by having all this sensory data from all across the organization, we're then able to understand, is it observability we're investing into? Is it AI ops? Is it Gen AI for productivity, knowledge, data quality? Is it agentic AI? Do we want to set up digital workers? Only then will we be able to avoid that typical trap that 52% of organizations fall into, which is not delivering their digital initiatives targets. With 92% of the executives looking to increase their spend in AI, therefore, it will ultimately be up to the heads of the departments to identify the technologies that will bring the biggest positive result to their organization in the shortest possible time and at the right cost. And I guess this is exactly where I'm sure we'll have a lot of conversations this year, and where we'll be helping our customers to get this right the first time.
Feeding from that, Jaro, on speed being new currency ultimately in that scenario, I personally believe that the most successful organizations we'll see in 2026 that succeed against their metrics, whether that again is increasing income, decreasing costs, providing exceptional experiences, will be the least technical ones. And they'll be the ones that make a decision and follow through on that decision that they've made. Because everyone else, the really technical organizations, will go round in circles in experimenting and trialing and trying to get it perfect when there's no such thing, one, as perfect, and two, by the time they've got it perfect, their competition will have delivered the change that they were trying to deliver in a much more agile and efficient approach.
I would also say that if we think about 2025 and 2024 as years of experimentation and trying to see what this technology can do, this year, I'm pretty sure it's all the CFOs knocking on the doors of the different departments saying, what has that actually done? And how much more can we get out of these different technologies? And ultimately, some heads will also fall along the way, because the businesses are now really cracking down on what has made a true positive difference. And if the leaders don't have the numbers, they're in trouble.
And this ties into the ABC. AI is an easy one to pick on, but this happens across all of the areas we're involved in. We've had the area of curiosity. We've had the time of experimentation. As you rightly say there, Jaro, we're now in a point of accountability. No business had spare money to experiment, but yet they found it. Now we're in the accountability stage. We have to guarantee a benefit. We have to decide what that benefit is. We have to have a strategic guide, not just for next year, but for the next 5 years, because then the decisions we make in the next 12 to 18 months are aligned to a strategic outcome that can be held to account at the end of this. Instead of try before you buy or experimentation, you're aligned to a true planned outcome. And I think that's one of the biggest drivers in IT over the next 12 to 18 months.
Anyone that's listening to this is probably thinking, hey guys, this all sounds like things we should be doing anyway as business leaders, like running our businesses with integrity, looking at our costs, increasing our income, making sure that we're right-sized and fit for purpose to be able to do the things that we want to do as a business. Sounds very much like what they should be doing anyway, realistically. Just what we're saying is, by everything that's taking place, what we're seeing so far in 26 and everything we're seeing potentially come from a technology perspective, further compounds the fact that some of it isn't being done today or hasn't been done in the past. And that's where now is a perfect time to resolve that problem through technology and people and process. So on that note, we'll call this podcast to an end. So thank you very much for listening. I've been Kyle Davies, Director for Technology and Services at CDW.
And I've been Rob Sims, Chief Technologist for Hybrid Platforms.
I've been Tim Russell, Chief Technologist for Modern Workspace.
And Jaro Tomik, Chief Technologist for Digital Enablement.
Be sure to check out the back catalogue for more great insights. Don't forget to subscribe via your favourite podcast platform so you never miss an episode. We appreciate your support. And if you have a topic you want us to cover, feel free to reach out. Catch you next time.